There is a person you have never met. You have never seen their face. You have never heard their voice. You don't know what made them laugh or what made them cry or what they were afraid of in the dark. And yet that person was you. For the first few years of your life, you were awake. You were learning. You were looking up at faces and reaching for light and tasting things for the very first time. Something was happening in there. Something enormous. And you kept none of it. Think about that for a second. Really sit with it. There is a whole human being, the earliest version of you, who lived an entire chapter of your life. Years of mornings, years of afternoons, thousands of moments where you were fully present, fully there, eyes open, brain running, gone. Not blurry, not faded, just absent like the pages were torn out before you ever got to read them. You know what happened. You've seen the photographs. Someone held you. Someone fed you. Someone stayed up all night when you couldn't sleep. There is proof everywhere that you existed before your memory begins. But you can't get in. The door to those years is locked, and you were the one living behind it, and you still can't get in. So here is the question, the one that sounds simple until you actually try to answer it. Why can't you remember being a baby? Now, the obvious answer is the one most people reach for. You were too young. Your brain wasn't finished yet. Nothing was really happening in there, so there was nothing to remember. It's a clean explanation. It feels right. It's also wrong, because the strange thing about those early years is not that your brain was quiet. It was the opposite. Your brain in those first years was the busiest it would ever be in your entire life. More was happening in your head at 18 months than will ever happen again. You were learning to walk, learning to grip, learning that the giant face leaning over you meant safety. You were absorbing an entire language from scratch with no dictionary, no teacher, no instructions. Just sound pouring in until one day it turned into meaning. That is not a quiet brain. That is a brain on fire. Consider the language thing alone, because it's almost unbelievable when you stop and look at it. You were handed no rules. Nobody sat you down and explained grammar. Nobody told you where one word ended and the next began. All you got was a river of sound, endless, unbroken, pouring over you every waking hour. And out of that river, with no instructions, you extracted an entire working language. You figured out that certain sounds were words, that words had order. That order carried meaning. You cracked a code that adults with textbooks and teachers and years of effort often can't fully crack in a lifetime. You did it before you could tie a shoe. That is the machine we're talking about. That is what your infant brain was. Not a blank, not a fog, the single most powerful learning engine you would ever be. And that is exactly the machine whose diary you can't read. So the puzzle deepens. You weren't too underdeveloped to remember. You were doing the hardest cognitive work of your entire life. And somehow that is exactly the period you can't recall. Here's the thing. The learning stuck. The memories didn't. You still speak the language you learned back then. You still walk. You still know somewhere deep and wordless that a warm voice means you're safe. All of that survived. Everything you learned in those years is still inside you, running quietly under everything you do. But the moments, the actual experiences, the specific afternoon you first stood up on your own 2 feet, nothing. And that gap between everything you learned and nothing you can recall is where the real mystery lies. This phenomenon has a name. A man named Sigmund Freud noticed it more than 100 years ago and called it infantile amnesia, the strange near-total blank that almost every adult carries over their first few years of life. Freud had his own theories about why. Most of them didn't hold up, but the name stuck because the thing he was pointing at is real, and it's nearly universal. Ask almost anyone. Where does your memory begin? For most people, the answer lands somewhere around age 3. A single flash, a birthday, a move to a new house, a moment on a beach, and before that flash, a wall of nothing. So for a long time, the explanation went like this. Babies simply don't form memories. The recording equipment isn't installed yet. You can't lose a tape you never made. It's a tidy story. And for decades, it was the standard answer. But then someone actually looked inside an infant's brain while it was working. And the story fell apart. To understand what they found, you need to meet a small structure buried deep in the middle of your brain. It's called the hippocampus, curled and about the size of your thumb. The hippocampus is the part of you that turns a moment into a memory. Everything you can consciously recall, your last birthday, your first day at a job, the face of someone you love, all of it was stamped into permanence by this one small structure. It's the recording head. The thing that takes the raw stream of your experience and files it into something you can find again later. When the hippocampus is working, moments become memory. When it isn't, moments just pass through you and vanish. And it's worth slowing down on how it actually does this, because it's stranger than it sounds. A memory is not stored the way a photo is stored on a phone. There's no single file, no little box with a picture inside. Instead, when something happens to you, a specific group of neurons fires together. That exact pattern, those exact cells lighting up in that exact combination, is the memory. Scientists even have a name for it, an engram, the physical trace a moment leaves in your brain. And here's the key. Those cells that fired together get wired together. The connections between them grow stronger, so that later, when one part of the pattern lights up, the rest follows, and the whole moment comes flooding back. A smell, a song, and suddenly you're somewhere you haven't been in years. That's an engram firing, the pattern completing itself. So a memory is really a shape held in living tissue, a constellation of connections, and it survives only as long as that shape survives. Now, hold that thought, because it's about to matter enormously. So the natural assumption was simple. In babies, the hippocampus must be switched off. Not built yet, not recording. Except it isn't off. A scientist named Turk-Browne wanted to know for certain. So his team did something that sounds almost impossible. They put babies, real infants, inside a brain scanner and got them to hold still long enough to watch what their brains actually did while they were seeing new things. The babies were shown images, faces, objects, scenes, and the researchers watched the hippocampus, and it lit up. When a baby saw something new, the hippocampus fired exactly the way an adult's does when it's saving a memory. The stronger it fired, the more likely the baby was to recognize that image later. The recording head was on. It was working. It was doing precisely the job it was built to do. So, the old story died right there. Babies do form memories. The equipment is installed, it's plugged in, and it's running, which makes the mystery so much worse. Because now you have a brain that records, and a person you who cannot play any of it back. If the memories are being made, then where do they go? This is where it gets strange. And to see it, you have to stop thinking about your baby brain as unfinished and start thinking about it as a construction site that never stops. Here is what almost nobody tells you about those early years. Your brain wasn't just storing information. It was rebuilding itself constantly while it ran. New brain cells being born by the thousands, pushing their way into the wiring every single day. Scientists call this neurogenesis, the birth of new neurons. And your infant hippocampus was flooded with it, producing new neurons at a rate you will never touch again as an adult. It was the most explosive growth of your life happening in the exact structure responsible for holding your memories. Zoom in for a moment, down past the whole brain, past the hippocampus, all the way to a single cell. Watch it be born. A brand new neuron appearing in the middle of a network that's already running, already holding patterns, already carrying the faint shapes of moments. And this new cell doesn't wait politely for an empty seat. It pushes in, it reaches out, it forms its own connections, forces its own links, and in doing so, it tugs on the wiring that was already there. The existing pattern shifts. Just slightly, just enough. Now multiply that. Thousands of times a day, every day, for years. Each new neuron, a small hand, rearranging the furniture in a room where a memory was trying to sit still. Pull the camera back out and you see the whole hippocampus in perpetual motion, a structure that is trying to store your life while simultaneously rebuilding itself from the inside. It's like trying to write in a notebook whose pages are being reprinted while your pen is still moving. Now, think about what that means. A memory is not a thing sitting in a drawer. A memory is a pattern, a specific set of connections between specific cells wired together in a specific shape. That shape is the memory. Hold the shape and you keep the moment. But your baby hippocampus wasn't holding still. It was under construction. New cells forcing their way in, hour after hour, splitting old connections, rerouting the wiring, rebuilding the very structure the memories were written into. Picture a message carved into wet sand. And then picture the tide coming in. Not once. Every hour. Every day. For years. The message was real. It was carved. And then the shoreline was rebuilt on top of it. And there's a detail here that makes the whole thing click into place. It explains the strangest part of all of this. The gap you noticed at the very beginning. Remember, the learning stuck, but the memories didn't. That's not a contradiction. It's a clue. Your brain doesn't have one kind of memory. It has several, and they don't all live in the same place. There's the memory of how to walk, how to grip a spoon, how to shape your mouth around a word. That kind of memory doesn't live in the hippocampus at all. It gets burned into deeper, older circuits, the kind that don't care about the tide. Once a skill is carved there, it stays. That's why you never forgot how to speak. And then there's the memory of what happened, the specific afternoon, the actual moment. That kind of memory, the kind you can replay, does live in the hippocampus, right in the path of the flood. So watch what happens to a baby now. The how goes into the safe, stable vault and survives. The what goes into the room that's being rebuilt every hour and washes away. Two kinds of memory, two different fates. Same child. That's why you can still do everything you learned back then, and remember none of the days you learned it. The skills went somewhere the tide couldn't reach. The moments didn't. This is the neurogenic hypothesis, and its clearest champions are two researchers named Frankland and Sheena Josselyn. Their idea is quietly devastating. The same explosive growth that makes a baby's brain a genius at learning is the exact thing that stops the baby from keeping any single memory. And here is the part that turned it from a guess into something real. They tested it. In young mice whose brains do the same thing yours did, flooding with new neurons, forgetting almost everything, they taught the young mice to fear a specific room. Normally that fear fades fast, the way an infant's memories fade. That's the mouse version of infantile amnesia. Then they slowed the neurogenesis down. They quieted the flood of new neurons, and the young mice remembered. The fear stayed. The memory that should have washed away held its shape because the tide had been turned off. Then they ran it backwards. They took adult mice whose brains are normally calm and stable and forced the neuron growth back up. They opened the floodgates in a brain that had long since settled, and the adult mice started to forget. Stable memories in grown animals began slipping away just because the construction had started again. Read that twice. They could switch forgetting on and off in either direction by turning one dial. More new neurons, less memory. Fewer new neurons, more memory. The tide wasn't a metaphor anymore. It was a lever, and they'd found it. Now this is the moment where it would be easy to stop. To say, that's it, that's the answer, the neurons did it, case closed. But there's a question the mouse experiment doesn't quite answer. And it's the one that matters most to you. Did the tide destroy the memories? Or did it just hide them? Those are not the same thing. Overwriting a memory means the shape is gone, the engram erased. There is nothing left to find. But losing access to a memory means the shape is still there intact, sitting in the tissue. You just can't fire it anymore. The pattern is whole and unreachable. The mice couldn't tell us which one it was. A mouse that stops freezing might have lost the memory. Or it might just have lost the path back to it. From the outside, forgetting and hiding look exactly the same. And that ambiguity is the crack the whole mystery slips through. But the hippocampus was never working alone. And this is the piece people miss. There's another part of your brain sitting up front, right behind your forehead, the prefrontal cortex. Think of it as the editor, the one that takes the raw footage, the hippocampus records, and stitches it into something coherent, a scene, a story, a moment with a beginning and an end that you can actually find and play back. In a baby, that editor has barely shown up for work. The prefrontal cortex is one of the last parts of your brain to finish growing. It's still forming well into your 20s. In your first years, it's almost offline. So even the moments that got recorded had no editor to assemble them. The raw footage came in, but nobody was in the cutting room. No scene got built, no story got filed under a place you could return to. There's a name for this problem: binding. Your adult brain takes a sight, a sound, a smell, a feeling, and binds them together into one single memory, one unified moment you can recall as a whole. A baby brain can't bind like that yet. The pieces come in loose, scattered, never stitched. So imagine it now. Footage with no editor, pieces with nothing to bind them, a recording head running hot inside a room being rebuilt by the hour. It's a wonder anything survives at all. So that seems to close the case. Your baby memories are gone because the brain that made them destroyed them, overwritten by its own growth, washed out by its own tide. Except there's a crack in that ending. And it opens onto something even stranger. Because remember what Turk-Browne found. The baby hippocampus wasn't just firing at random. It fired hardest for the images the baby would recognize later. Which means at least sometimes something was getting through. Something was being saved. So maybe the memories aren't destroyed at all. Maybe they're still in there. This is the possibility that keeps some scientists up at night. That infantile amnesia isn't a failure to record. It's a failure to retrieve. The memories were filed. The cabinet was locked. And then, during all that rebuilding, you lost the key. The files didn't burn. You just can't find the drawer anymore. Think about what that would mean. Somewhere in the wiring of your adult brain, folded under everything you've become there, might be the actual afternoon you first saw snow. The first time a dog licked your hand. The first face you ever loved. Still there. Still real. Just sealed behind a door whose handle no longer exists. We don't fully know which story is true, whether those earliest moments were overwritten or simply buried alive. The honest answer is that the science is still standing at that door, listening, unsure what's on the other side. And here's a twist that should unsettle you a little. That one early memory you do have. The flash, the birthday, the beach, the move, the single scene you're sure survived from before the wall. There's a good chance you invented it. Not on purpose. Your brain would never tell you it did this. But think about where that memory really came from. A photograph you saw 100 times. A story your family told at dinner again and again until you could see it. A home video played on a loop. Your brain took those fragments, the photo, the story, the feeling, and did what it does best. It built a scene. It stitched them into something that feels exactly like a memory. Vivid. First person. Yours. But you may not be remembering the moment at all. You may be remembering the story of the moment. A reconstruction so smooth and so convincing that it's wearing the costume of a real memory. Here's the eerie test. Sometimes people have a crystal clear early memory of something that it turns out never happened to them. It happened to a sibling, or in a movie, or nowhere at all. And they'll swear they were there because the scene in their head is indistinguishable from the real thing. So even the one door you thought was open might lead to a room your brain built afterward. A set, a stage, furnished from photographs and other people's words. Which means the blank might be even wider than you feel it is. Not one flash and then nothing. Maybe just nothing with a single beautiful forgery hanging where the first real memory should be. But either way, something in you was lost in translation. And that word translation turns out to matter more than you'd think. Because there's one more piece to this. And it isn't about neurons at all. It's about words. And this is the part that flips the whole mystery inside out. Up to now, everything has been about the brain, the tide, the editor, the engram, machinery. But a memory isn't only made of tissue. It's made of meaning. And meaning needs something the machinery can't provide on its own. It needs a language to hold it. And it needs a self to hold it for. A baby has neither. Not yet. And watch how much that changes everything. Watch what happens to a child right around the age memory starts to stick. Somewhere near 3 or 4, two things arrive at almost the same time. Language and a sense of self. Before language, you had no words to hang an experience on. You felt the warmth of the sun, but you couldn't think the word warm. You saw your mother's face, but you had no story called My Mother. Experience came in raw, wordless, unlabeled, pure sensation with nothing to pin it to. Two researchers, Gabrielle Simcock and Harlene Hayne, showed this with quiet precision. They found that when a child learns to describe an event, they can only describe it later using the words they already had at the time it happened. The memory gets locked in the vocabulary of the child who lived it, and a child with almost no words has almost no way to file the moment as a story. And here's a strange piece of proof that words really are part of the lock. Your first memory doesn't begin at the same age everywhere on Earth. When researchers ask adults across different cultures where their memory starts, the answer shifts. In some places, people's earliest memories arrive later at a blanker, higher age. In others, they reach back further, catching moments a year or more earlier. The difference tracks with how families talk to children. Where parents tell rich, detailed stories about the child's day, asking what happened, what it felt like, weaving the moment into words, the children grow up able to reach further back. Where the talk is sparser, the wall of forgetting sits higher. Sit with what that means. Something as simple as how much someone spoke to you and told your day back to you as a story helped decide how far back your own memory can now reach. The moment needed language to become a memory, and the language came from the people around you narrating your life until you could narrate it yourself. Now add the self. For your first couple of years, there was no solid you at the center of things, no clear line between where you ended and the world began. And a memory, the kind you can recall, needs an owner. It needs a "this happened to me." Without a stable me, the moment has nowhere to belong. So the picture comes together and it's bigger than any single cause. Your baby brain was recording, but the tide of new neurons was reshaping the shoreline as fast as the moments were carved. And even the moments that survived were written in a language you didn't have yet filed under a self that hadn't finished forming. No words, no narrator, no stable you to say this is mine. The memories weren't just erased. Some of them were never fully translatable in the first place. And this is where the whole thing stops being about neuroscience and starts being about you, about what it actually means to be a person. Because think about who that forgotten child was. That was the version of you that learned to trust, or learned not to. The version that discovered whether the world was safe, whether crying brought comfort or silence, whether a face would come when you needed it. You don't remember a single day of it, and yet it built you. The way you flinch or don't, the way you reach for people or pull back, the ease or the ache you feel when someone holds you. So much of that was written in those years in the chapter you can't read. You are in a very real sense shaped by a story you're not allowed to remember. And there's a flip side to this, and it's quietly heartbreaking. If you ever care for a small child, a son, a daughter, a niece, someone you'd do anything for, they won't remember it. Not the nights you stayed up, not the way you held them when they were sick, not the 1,000 small moments where you were completely exhaustingly there. To them, those years will be the same blank they are to you. A locked door. You will pour years of love into a person who will never be able to recall a single day of it. And yet, it won't be lost. That's the whole point of everything you've just seen. The moments vanish, but what they build stays. The child won't remember the comfort, but they'll carry the trust it created. They won't remember your face leaning over the crib, but they'll grow up somewhere deep and wordless, expecting the world to be kind. The love doesn't survive as memory. It survives as who they become. That's the deal. That's the strange, tender arithmetic of those early years. The details get washed away. The person is what remains. That's the strange inheritance of being human. The most formative years of your life are the ones sealed away from you. You carry their fingerprints on everything you do, and you will never see the hand that left them. Your earliest self did the deepest work, learned the first lessons, set the foundation the whole rest of you was built on top of, and then it slipped beneath the waterline and disappeared, leaving only the results behind. And you might ask the deeper question here, the one underneath all of it. Why would evolution allow this? If those years matter so much, why build a brain that throws the memory of them away? Think about what a baby's brain actually needs to do. It is walking into a world it knows nothing about. It has to learn everything and fast, which sounds means light, means safe, means danger. It has to be the most flexible learning machine it will ever be. And flexibility has a cost. To learn that fast, the brain has to stay soft, unfinished, constantly rewiring, constantly making room for the next lesson. A brain that locked its memories in hard from day one would be a brain that couldn't keep learning at that speed. So the forgetting isn't a bug, it might be the price of the gift. The same open, unfinished, endlessly rewiring brain that lets a baby learn a language from thin air is the brain that can't hold still long enough to keep a single afternoon. You were built to learn everything, and to do that you had to be willing to lose almost all of it. The tide that washed away your memories is the same tide that let you become a person in the first place. You didn't lose those years because they didn't matter. You lost them because your brain was doing something it could only do once. Growing that fast, learning that hard, rebuilding itself in real time, and the price of that impossible growth was the memory of the growing. So come back to the question, the one that seemed so simple at the start. Why can't you remember being a baby? Not because nothing happened. Everything happened. It was the richest, fastest, most important stretch of learning you will ever live through. Not because your brain wasn't recording. It was. The little structure that saves your life into memory was awake and firing from the very beginning. You can't remember it because your brain was changing too fast to hold still. Because the tide of new growth kept rewriting the shore. Because the moments came before the words and before the self that would have let you keep them as a story. The recording was made. The projector just can't reach that reel anymore. And notice how different that answer is from the one you started with. You began by assuming the tape was blank, that there was nothing to remember because nothing much was happening. A small, quiet, unfinished brain waiting to boot up. The truth is almost the exact reverse. The tape was full, bursting. It holds the most important footage of your entire life. The learning, the trust, the first shape of who you'd become, it's all on there. You just can't press play. Not because the reel is empty, because it was recorded on a machine that was rebuilding itself in a language you didn't have for a self that hadn't arrived. The blank was never a blank. It was a locked room, full to the ceiling. And maybe that's the part worth sitting with. Not that those years are gone, but that they were never really gone at all. They live in you now, silently running the show in ways you're only half aware of. The vanished memories didn't take their meaning with them. They left it inside you, still shaping how you move through the world. So, there is a person you have never met. You've never seen their face, or heard their voice, or held the memory of a single thing they did. But they're not a stranger. They're not lost. They're still here, sitting quietly inside you, running the show. You just weren't given the tickets to remember the performance.